Hi everyone, I have a really quick video today going over adding projectiles to our 2D game. We're going to focus on four things. We'll focus on a script for firing the projectiles. We'll focus on creating a bullet point or start point for the projectile, a game object or prefab, which will be fired, and then last but not least will be a script that which we will put on the prefab to handle any collisions that it takes. So hopefully it goes pretty quick and easy, but let's get started. Here is just a quick demo of our script in action. Basically, when you click the mouse button, we should be able to fire in the direction that we are looking. And important thing to note is each of these snowballs that I am firing off are just clones and they do destroy on their own. It's really important that you do not allow them to stay on the screen, otherwise you're going to quickly run out of memory. I also programmed it so a object tagged enemy, when it's hit by the projectile, will just be destroyed. But let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we are going to create a new script. This will be a mono behavior script. And actually, real important thing, before we do that, I do want to stress this as well. Just in case, I'm going to be using the old input system, which the newer versions of Unity do not like me starting out with. I enjoy using it because it's easier to teach. It feels a lot less like magic. The new input system, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic and I still use it, but I like to teach the old one. So make sure you go into project settings, player, active input handling, and I would either do both or old, but make sure it's not set to new. And then we're going to go ahead and create a new script. I'm going to call it Projectile Launcher. And then go ahead and open it up. As always, when I start a script, I like to delete everything. That way, like I'm using clean, well-organized code. And I'm only going to have a few variables. Those variables will be all private. One of them is going to be a game object. This is going to be the projectile prefab. How do I call it? Projectile prefab. And then I also need to have a launch point. That one is going to be a transform. It's going to be something that is going to follow me, but I'm making these serialized fields. I will end up dragging something in there, so make sure you pay attention to that step. How do I call this? Launch point. And then a couple other elements I'm going to add. One of them, I'm going to make this auto fire. So this one will be a private float, and I'll just call it fire rate. Set it to something arbitrary, but if I'm going to auto fire, I need to set some sort of fire rate so that like it doesn't launch continuously. And I'm usually a lot better at commenting my code while I teach, so make sure I mention this stuff. You will need to drag your bullet prefab here. And this will be an empty transform child of the player game object. I'm just going to write, we will drag this in as well. And then I'm going to add one more float. This is going to be essentially for a timer. I'll just call it next fire time. Start it off at 0. This is to create delay. All right. And then from there, I honestly don't have anything pressing right away for start, so I'm going to just jump right into the update. Yep, private void update. Remember, this happens at the frame rate of the computer. So this will be different for every computer, but I'd like to put all of my inputs in update because I want those to trigger right away. Anything that is physics-based, I'll put in the fixed update. And in that update, I'm just going to use again, this is the old input system, but if input.get, I could use .get key or get button. I'm going to use button. I know that's an easy one for your mouse click. And fire 1 is actually the mouse click button. If by chance like you see an error like the old input system, that means you'll have to go back in your project settings and change the active input to the old one, or both. But I'm also going to add one other thing, and it's going to be time.time is less than, oops, or equal to the next fire time. So basically, if you are holding the button down, and that is mouse left. And the delay has been met or passed. If that happens, what I'm going to want to do, first thing is I'm going to change the next fire time to equal the current time plus the fire rate. That's why I had 2 buttons for it. So yeah, the next fire time, the current time has to surpass that. And next, I'm going to end up calling, how about I just comment it out for right now, but I'm going to call a method I'll create called shoot. I'm just commenting it out now because otherwise like I'll have an error there and that will bug me, or I know some of my programmers, so I'm just going to keep it commented out. But there it is. Now I can uncomment it, people don't mind. Call the shoot method. And then, okay, from the shoot, this is what's going to happen. We are going to instantiate, which is a fancy word for create a new object, but we're going to create a new prefab projectile. And in order to do that, I'm just going to write game object, I'll call it projectile, equals instantiate a new projectile prefab. And where do okay, instantiate has some overloads. If I don't put in a position for it, I believe it will set it at the global position of 0, which I definitely do not want. I want it to instantiate at the launch point. So it will be launch point dot position, which is that transform. And then the rotation that I want to be at will just be the same as the launch point. So launch point dot rotation. So this will create a new projectile at the launch point. And then next, that projectile won't actually move until I apply physics to it or some sort of transformation. I like using the rigid body and that physics, especially with collisions. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a rigid body onto that, projectile. More specifically, a rigid body 2D, because we're working in the 2D space. Do not do regular rigid body. And parentheses, because this is a method getting that rigid body. And now that we have accessed it, we can call a method of it. The one we'll call is add force. And this one is just going to be a new vector 2. This one, we're only firing straight. There are a lot of ways that we can manipulate this and fire in a whole bunch of directions, but for right now, I'm only showing you how to fire it straight. Transform dot, oh, and this will be important too because I want to go in the direction that I'm looking. So I'm gonna go transform dot local scale dot x times, oh, I could use one more variable. How about I add that right now? This will be a float we'll call launch speed. I should probably call it launch force in that case, launch force. How much force we are applying to the projectile. All right, but times the launch force. And since it's strictly horizontal, 0 f for the y-axis in our transform. And then add a comma. And force mode 2D dot impulse. That will add a large amount of force all at once. So I'm just going to give some comments above so that we've got space, but the line below accesses the projectile's rigid body, 2D, and applies force in the correct facing x direction. Awesome. And then I think it's a very good idea to do this right now, just in case I don't want that projectile to stay on the screen. So I'm going to just write destroy projectile, but I don't want it to happen immediately. How about after 3 seconds? Awesome. Okay, make sure you go ahead and save this. This is actually everything that we are going to need for our launcher. And next we are going to hop into the game and I will show you how to add a few elements to get to the next step. All right, jumping into that game, I have my player right over here, and this is actually a pretty important organization technique. Generally, I will want to separate my scripts and logic from the visual. So I have the player and the visual, but I'm going to get rid of that one. So all I really have right now is the player with their rigid body and their movement. And let me get rid of that temporarily. But to add a bullet point to the player, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the player and create an empty. You'll notice that this empty is a child of the player. And I'm going to call this launch point. And then clicking on the launch point. Happens to be right there. Sorry, the background's a little distracting. Let me hide that. Or just delete it. There we go. All right, the launch point. Let's put it right there. Yeah, that seems fine. An important thing that I'm going to do is my projectile, you can make it a collider if you would like, but like my collider, I'm going to make a trigger. But I really want to set that launch point, I don't know, at some spot that makes sense in front of my player. If I were holding some sort of weapon, I would put it at the end of that barrel. And then next, let me go ahead and add the projectile launcher script. I apologize for this. This is terrible technique. I want to capitalize the names of all of my classes, or Pascal case, if you will. I happen to lowercase it. I might fix that now. Here's an important thing to know. If I fix it here, I also need to fix it here. Otherwise, it will not be visible. But both names need to match, and I really should always Pascal case. All right, but next, going on to my player, I'm going to drag that script onto them. There we go. And then the projectile launcher script, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in that launch point. And then for the projectile prefab, I may not have that yet, so let me go ahead and make that. In order to make it, I'm just going to go really, really simple, but I'm going to right click, create a 2D object, a sprite, not a square, that would look kind of odd. A circle. There we go. It does not matter where this is. I'm going to fix or change it. And I'm going to shrink it. Yeah, seems like an appropriate size. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to set the position as 0, 0, 0. But it should be fine regardless. And I think I'm going to call this, I already have one called Snowball, so I'm just going to call it Projectile. But inside of this projectile, I'm going to add, for right now, I'm going to add a rigid body 2D. And I don't want it to fall down. I really just kind of want it to stay going straight. So to resist the pull of gravity, I'm just going to set the gravity scale to 0. Another possibility is changing it to the body type to kinematic, but I'm just going to change that gravity scale to 0. And then I don't have a collider on it yet because it's 2D space. So add components. This will be a circle collider 2D. And an important element, make sure you make it a trigger. That way it will not hit and push items. Unless, of course, you want it to. That's totally fine as well. But I'm just going to make mine a trigger. And then I'm going to do one more thing. And that thing is create a script specifically for the projectile. So create a mono behavior script. I already have one named projectile, so I'm just going to call this one projectile 2. Or how about player projectile? And I'm going to go ahead and open up that script. And this one, I'm just going to keep very, very simple for this video. If you'd like, you can do things like add a amount of damage, but all I'm going to do is this. A private void on trigger 2D enter, or trigger enter 2D. So once it actually collides with something, I'm going to do this. If the collision dot, let's go compare tag enemy. So what that means is if the projectile collided with an object tagged enemy. If that's the case, we're just going to destroy the enemy. Destroy actually is pretty anticlimactic. Basically, it just immediately erases the game object. If I'd like, I can add a delay in there, like wait a second. But I'm not going to add a delay, so it's just going to destroy the game object immediately. And then I'm going to do this. So if it collides with something, I want it to get destroyed anyway. So I'm just going to, oh, the bullet is what I mean. I don't want it to destroy whatever it hits. If I write destroy game object, this will destroy the projectile. If it's a little easier to read, you could write destroy this.game object. This is not necessary, but it makes it a little more readable. All right, that is it for the projectile script. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to my projectile. So going back into the game, I'm going to click on the projectile and just drag the script over. There we go. All right, and then the projectile really has everything I need for it to be an effective prefab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into assets. If you have not done this yet, for good organization purposes, I recommend you create a folder named prefabs. We really do want to organize our code well. If we put everything just inside the assets, then especially when our game gets big, it becomes basically unmanageable. So let's organize our stuff. Create a folder called prefabs. I already have one called snowball, but this one's called projectile. I'm just going to drag that in. And I don't need it in the scene anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. I've got it right here. Everything's fine. Next, this is the final step, I promise. Clicking on the player, I'm going to scroll down to their launcher script, and then I'm just going to drag the projectile into it. So now, when I instantiate a prefab, I'm going to instantiate this one, and I'm going to apply that force to it. I'm going to instantiate it at this point, and we'll see it go. So let's go ahead and press play. Okay, I see the issue. All right, mine keeps deleting as soon as I start. And I know exactly why. Let me go ahead and go into the projectile, that script, and fix that. The issue is this. It is colliding with me. So what I want to do is just make it ignore me. If the collision.compare tag is player, then return. And what return does is it just leaves the trigger enter and waits until it enters something else. Whoops. Return essentially, I meant to make that comment. Return just leaves the function. Excellent. All right. There's one more thing that I kind of forgot to do. I forgot to actually tag something enemy. I did that previously, but let me show you how to do that as well. Make sure you save. And since that was connected to the prefab, I don't need to do any extra like movements there. But for creating that enemy tag, I'll just go under tags. I happen to already have one, but you'll click add tag. Click plus. Make sure it is spelled the same way that you wrote it inside of the compare tag, but name it enemy. And an important thing to note is after you add that tag, that doesn't mean that you've tagged it yet. You'll have to click back on that object, and the tag should like default to untagged. Change it to enemy. Now everything should be set. My projectile should not destroy when it hits me. It should just go through. And will destroy after 3 seconds. Excellent. I should see it destroy when, yep, destroys when it hits a platform too. And when it hits the enemy should, yep, erase as well. Awesome. All right. Those elements are ones that I created and will show everybody later. But I hope you found this informative and helpful. Have a great rest of your day and keep on coding.